Joke, Levy! Who the fuck am I playing? This is not Levy Rosman. Just fuck, I'm completely fucked.
Hans Niemann was just destroyed by Gotham Chess, and this might be the second most embarrassing game in all of chess history. I'll give you one hint what the most embarrassing game was. Now, this game just took place 2 days ago in the weekly Titled Tuesday tournament on chess.com. In the game, Gotham Chess was playing white, and he opened 1e4, and after a good laugh, Hans Niemann decided to play Gotham Chess's #1 favorite opening, and that is the Caro-Kann Defence with c6 and then d5. Now from here, white has a ton of different ideas that he can play. Of course, the most popular options are e5, the advanced variation, and knight c3, the classical variation. But instead of playing the main lines as usual, Gotham Chess decides to go for a trash variation, and today his trash opening of choice is the fantasy variation with 3f3. And I mean that with no disrespect to Gotham Chess, but oh boy, does he love his trash openings with white and black. Now from here, Hans Niemann goes e6, very solid, getting that Caro-Kann pawn triangle in the middle of the board. Then knight c3, bishop b4, pinning the knight to the king. And then Gotham goes a3, and we have one of the first big decisions of the game. What does Hans Niemann do about this bishop on b4? Now in the game, he actually retreats the bishop to the a5 square. However, this move is already a little bit passive. Instead, the strongest idea is simply taking the knight, and then after b takes, you take the pawn on e4. And now this move is incredibly strong because there's already a trap in the position. Now if you like puzzles, go ahead and pause this position and try and find the right idea. Did you find it? Well, if white takes back the pawn here, then black has the very strong move queen to h4 check, hitting both the king and the pawn. And here it's already getting ugly. If you go g3, black takes the pawn with another pin on the king and the rook. Therefore, you have to play the suicidal looking move king e2, and this is just terrible for white. So of course, taking the pawn on e4 is not the right idea. You cannot do that. Instead, you have to do a waiting move. And here after something like a4, knight d7, bishop c4, knight f6, here black is up a pawn, but the computer seems to think white has just enough compensation to hold the balance. But I'm gonna be honest, I do not like white's position here at all. So Hans Niemann in the game could have achieved this line by force, simply taking the knight on c3. But instead of that, he retreats the bishop to a5, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this move. Even if you ignore the alternative, just stylistically, I already don't really like black's position. Now, what is Gotham Chess supposed to do from here? Well, in the game, he starts bishop e3, and this move is kind of weird. I mean, you're losing the opportunity to go bishop d2, protecting the knight and eliminating the pin from the bishop on a5. Instead, to me, the most natural idea would have been bishop d3, and then after something like knight d7 from black, you go bishop d2. The idea is you're stopping that pin on the knight. You can permanently avoid getting doubled pawns. You can follow up knight e2 and then castles kingside. And from here, I kind of think white has everything he could have wanted from the position. But instead of that, bishop e3 on the board. So what is the idea of this move? Well, let's find out. In the game, Hans Niemann goes knight e7. There is this very logical plan from black in this position to go knight e7 and knight d7 and then castle. And it may look kind of weird having the knights on these 7th rank squares. However, the knight on d7 can easily transfer over to f6 if needed, and black surprisingly is doing just fine. So knight e7 on the board, and now Gotham goes bishop d3. And again, this just does not look optimal to me. That bishop on e3 really does belong on the d2 square. Instead of this, the computer has the very aggressive idea of going queen to d2 instead of bishop d3. Now, this move prepares long castles, and white also has ideas based on playing h2 to h4. For example, already if black goes knight d7, then h4 is a possibility, and white's even threatening h5 to h6 in this position. Now, that is a very dangerous attacking idea from white. But instead, bishop d3 on the board. Not going to criticize this too much, still very solid. And here, Hans Hans Niemann has a chance to completely take over the game. I'm talking just absolutely crushing Gotham already on move 7, and he misses the move. Hans Niemann, you're my favorite player, but when you lose to Gotham Chess like this and you keep missing these chances, it hurts me. In the game, he goes knight d7, a very thematic Caro-Kann move. However, the key idea is bada bang, e5, blowing open the center. What's the idea? Well, it turns out no matter what white does, he is just screwed. For example, if you take the pawn on e5, then you go d4 with the double attack on the knight and the bishop, and the knight is pinned to the king. Okay, this is exactly why bishop d2 is a better square than e3 for the bishop. I mean, perfect example. Instead of taking on e5, what if you take the pawn on d5? Well, in that case, black takes with the knight hitting the bishop and the knight, and again, the bishop needs to be on d2! Woo! All right, in the game from here, white has to go bishop d2, retreating. But then, if this was played, Hans Niemann can simply trade everything on c3, then take on d4. And here, if white ever captures back, queen d4, but a bang, and white is getting just blown off the board. Okay, clearly taking on e5 or d5, not the right idea. What about b4? In that case, black just retreats. And here after the main computer line, once again, black up a pawn, doing just fine. And if white goes knight e2, the main developing idea, knight e2 then castles, here black can just blow everything open with the move c6 to c5, and there is so much tension in the center, and it all works out for black. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but this would have been nuts. So overall, e5, the key move from Hans Niemann that he missed and did not play in the game. Hans Niemann, oh boy, knight d7, giving Gotham one too many chances, and Gotham does not take that mistake for granted. He capitalizes. He gets his knight in the center. Hans Niemann takes, not that big of a deal. And here e5 is the right idea, but it's just not strong enough. Now, both sides castle. Castle for white, castles for black. And here, Gotham Chess has a wide variety of ideas to continue the initiative. Moves the computer Stockfish really likes here. Moves like h3, king h1, getting the king off that open diagonal here. Also moves like queen d2 or queen e1, intending queen to g3. All of these would have been good. Instead, Gotham Chess plays the move bishop to c4. Now, I understand the idea. Technically, there are lines where black wants to go f7 to f5, and the bishop temporarily blocks that, and the bishop technically is more active on c4 than on d3. However, you're developing a piece twice. It's just not the most optimal use of your move. Now, in the game, Hans Niemann makes another mistake, knight to g6. The problem is instead, if black just went e takes, knight takes, then knight to f6, you're starting to put pressure on these central squares, and this would have been simply so much better for Hans Niemann. Instead, knight g6 on the board, and yes, technically the knight is eyeing some squares and supporting e5, but I don't know, Hans Niemann just making mistake after mistake here. And now Gotham Chess has to find the key aggressive move, and I don't know if the old Gotham would have found this, but the new Gotham, I call this guy Gotham 2.0, he finds the move d5, the aggressive break in the center. The idea is if black ever takes on d5, then white is going to have this turbocharged pass pawn in the middle of the board. Oh, this is a beautiful position for Gotham. He is pressing. He smells blood in the water. Oh, okay. Hans Niemann, bishop b6, challenging the bishop on e3. Of course, the bishop is still pinned to the king. That bishop is inevitably going to be traded off. Now, Gotham plays a very logical move, queen d2. The idea is if you take the bishop on b6, then Hans Niemann can go queen takes b6, hitting the king with check, and here he's doing pretty well. So instead of that, he defends the bishop, and it's very hard to criticize this move, but there is a secret move, a secret queen move that he could have played instead. The idea is queen to d3. Now, this is a very deep idea that Gotham missed. The idea is if black plays something like, oh, I don't know, knight c5, then you can take the knight on c5, and now, because your queen's on d3 instead of d2, now your queen has access to the g3 square. That is the key idea. For example, king h1, and if black goes, I don't know, a5, the top move, then you bring the rook in and go queen g3. And on g3, this queen is so freaking active. So overall, queen d2, it's a mistake, but only because he had that hidden resource queen d3 in the position. Okay, what does Hans Niemann do in the game? Knight f6. However, the computer finds the absolutely disgusting move, queen g5. That queen is like the Snooki of chess pieces right now. If you saw Jersey Shore, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That queen is Snooki. It's disgusting. Oh, the idea is the bishop can't take the queen because it's pinned to the king. Oh, then the best move is rook f3, but then knight f6. Have you ever seen a position like this with the bishop hitting the queen, being pinned to the king, and the queen outside the knights? Oh my goodness, but instead of that, knight f6 on the board instead of the queen move. Now, the best move here is king h1, simply stepping out of the pin. Instead of that, Gotham plays the move h3, not bad. The idea is trying to take control of that g4 square, stopping knight g4 and bishop g4. Not a bad idea. King h1 would have been a little bit more precise, but h3 on the board. And here is why king h1 had to have been played on the prior move, because Hans Niemann missed this idea. He's missing so many moves in this game, but the key move was the unbelievable knight takes e4. Oh, the idea is if you take the knight, then c takes d5, and while white can take the pawn, that leaves the bishop undefended with check. Woo! My goodness, then king h1 followed by taking the queen, and then just going something like bishop e6, and black is dominating. But of course, Hans Niemann missing move after move. He does not find knight takes e4. Instead, c takes d5. Then after e takes d5, Gotham is starting to fight back in the game. Now Hans, he plays bishop d7, but my boy Hans missing move after move. Instead, knight e8 was the idea. The idea is you go knight d6. Oh, even Gotham 1.0 could have found that, let alone 2.0, but bishop e7 in the game. Now rook ad1. Gotham Chess centralizes the rook. He is fighting back in the game. And again, Hans Niemann misses knight e8. Instead, rook c8 on the board. Gotham, seeing the attack on the bishop, retreats the bishop. And now knight h5. Hans Niemann wants to unleash the f-pawn. He wants to go knight hf4, infiltrating on the king side. Now Gotham trades the bishop, goes king h2, getting the king off that diagonal once and for all. And this is where it's the beginning of the end for Hans Niemann. The beginning of his embarrassing loss against Gotham Chess, aka Levi Rosman. In the game, he presses with the move f5, but this is over-pressing. He is overestimating his chances. Instead, he had to go either knight h to f4 or king h8, and only then knight hf4. What is the problem with f5? Well, this move just weakens everything. It weakens this diagonal, exposing the king. These pawns are going to be vulnerable. I mean, Hans Niemann is just not in a position to start attacking. Now Gotham, queen g5. He wants to start the attack. Instead, the computer likes the idea of d6. Then you plump the knight on d5 and then e7, but still queen g5, not bad. It's the right idea. He wants to get that queen infiltrating in the center. Now Hans Niemann continues the wrong idea. He goes knight h to f4. Instead, you have to block the queen from going to e7, and the move is knight h to f6. If Hans did that, he would have still had the advantage in this game, but does he do that? No! Hans Niemann doesn't do that. He goes knight h f4, trying to attack, but this gives Gotham the chance to infiltrate. The queen has entered the game. Gotham going for it. Now rook c d8 from Hans, simply defending the bishop, but now Gotham Chess strikes d6. pushing the passed pawn, exposing the king to check. And after king h8, Gotham Chess takes the pawn on e5. Gotham up a clean pawn with the attack, with the better pieces. Oh no, Hans in trouble. Okay, Hans is not out yet. This boy is a fighter. There's a reason he's my #1 favorite chess player. Let's see what Hans does in the game. From here, the knight's being attacked, so he retreats the knight. Knight g6, good move. Now, queen d4. Gotham simply says, hey bro, do you want to trade queens? And for now, Hans has to refuse. Queen a5, but then rook fe1. Look at this rook. It's lining up with the e7 square. That rook would be a monster. From there, hitting the bishop and g7, threatening mate in one move. Oh boy, Hans is in trouble. And in the game, he has to go rook f6, blocking the queen's attack on g7. But once again, Hans over-pressing. His arrogance will be his downfall in this game. He goes f4. Oh no, now rook e7, threatening mate in one. Now Hans goes rook f6, but it is too late. Knight e4. The knight infiltrates, threatening the rook. And Hans is in deep trouble. Queen f5, and Gotham takes the rook. Then he threatens the queen trade, and Hans Niemann goes away. But once again, the queen trade, and finally, the queens come off the board. And let's take inventory. Gotham Chess up the exchange. That means he has a rook for the knight. He also has a pawn. He also has the better pawn structure. I mean, look at Gotham's pawns versus Hans Niemann's. Hans Niemann's pawns are just going to fall. And from here, Gotham just presses his advantage. And very quickly, he wins a second pawn. Gotham up 2 pawns and has excellent winning chances. Hans Niemann is shitting his pants right now. Okay, Hans is a fighter. He keeps fighting, but Gotham Chess, instead of choking, he just plays all the right moves, picks up the pawn, then attacks on the 7th rank. And from here, Gotham Chess simply consolidates and starts to push his kingside pawns down the board. This is the right idea. And while Hans puts up a little bit of resistance, in the end, the 2-pawn deficit is just too much. The rooks come off the board. The king is pushed back, and Gotham goes in for the finishing blow. The king infiltrates, and on move 63, Hans Niemann resigns. Gotham Chess is going to win the pawns on the queen side, push his pawns to promote, and that is going to be all she wrote. And in the end, Hans loses in the second most embarrassing loss of all time. Of course, we all know what the most embarrassing one was. And wow, what a game from Gotham Chess. Playing like a true fighter, fighting until the end and converting the win. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more of my Hans Niemann content, go ahead and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.